Good afternoon, everyone. The current time is 4 o'clock Central, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Desmond Martin. I'm the program, well, that's the old title. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at NextWaveSTEM, and I am so glad to have each and every one of you with us today for another one of our free webinars. Today, we will be talking about how we can help administrators build the blueprint for their STEM programs. This is a little bit different than what we've been doing previously in our webinars since the end of March that have been more centered on teaching pedagogy and emerging technology opportunities, specifically for teachers. Today, we want to talk about a more foundational approach to STEM programming at your school district and at your organization. So I'm really happy and excited to jump into that conversation with you all today. Before we get started, before we get a little bit ahead of ourselves, just a few housekeeping notes. The first is that we are in a webinar mode today. So as much as I'm sure you're completely camera ready, you've been practicing those Zoom lighting skills, we have our ring light set up and all ready to go. As much as I know that you've been drinking your tea with honey and you've got a beautiful sonorous voice to share with us, unfortunately, we will neither be able to see your face or hear your voice today. However, that does not mean that you are voiceless. The chat functionality is open. So if at any time during the course of today's webinar, you have a question, or if I'm going too fast, you'd like me to slow down, or if you just have something that you want to add to this context and this commentary, that would be amazing to have you share with us via the chat. Or if you've got a question that you would like to keep anonymous, you can use the Q&A functionality inside of Zoom. The second piece of housekeeping is just for our Illinois educators. NextWaveSTEM, we are based in Illinois. We are Chicago born and raised here. However, when it comes to today's professional development credit hour, this is only going to be for Illinois educators. While we are working hard to establish those partnerships with other state boards of education, we are unfortunately unable to certify your PD hours with those states. However, if you would like to just get the certificate just to show to your administrator or to your principal or just to hang on your wall, each of you will be receiving a follow-up email today with three things: a copy of today's webinar, a link to register to our next webinar series, and also a copy of the slide deck as an enduring piece of information for you, some support material. And of course, if you have any questions about any of that, you can feel free to email me, desmond@nextwavestem.com. But that information will be coming up during our webinar a little bit later on as well. So with that being said, with those few notes taken care of, we are going to jump right into it and get started. A great place to begin is right at the beginning. Many of you, this may be your first time learning about NextWaveSTEM. To put it very simply, NextWaveSTEM believes that it is critical and integral that we empower students by empowering teachers. We understand that educators are one of the most, if not the most essential part of a student's educational journey. That if they don't have a teacher that's encouraging them and is teaching specifically STEM with fidelity and with confidence, we're not going to see positive outcomes. The science tells us that. It's backed up through empirical study as well. So at NextWaveSTEM, we devoted ourselves to focusing on empowering teachers so that you in turn can empower and educate your students. We do this in a number of different ways, but one that we're really proud of is the licensed hands-on STEM curricula that we developed for K through 12 classrooms. That's something that is really close to our hearts. We've both done work in school and out of school time as well. And NextWaveSTEM grew out of this dream from our founder, actually, that students can have a high quality hands-on experience with computer science, with technology, with emerging technologies to better the future for our young people and for us. A really easy way for me to say that is I truly believe that our students will save the world. And some of those students who are sitting in your classrooms right now may be the very ones who do that. So we have two goals for today's webinar, two things that we hope that we can really accomplish during our time together. We're going to be hitting you with a little bit of information, so we're going to be moving decently quickly. We're also going to be making sure that we leave some time for Q&A at the end. So if you want to jump in the chat with your questions that you have as we go, or if you just want to digest as we go through our webinar material today and ask those questions at the end, we are more than happy to dig in with you there. The first two things that we want to accomplish for our webinar. First, we want to build a framework for the understanding of system-wide STEM program adoption. Answering that big question, why do we want to do STEM in a robust way? What benefits do we get out of that? What benefits do our students get out of it? Why? Before we talk about the what and how, we want to talk about the why. And then after we really address that question of the why, we want to talk about the framework for kickstarting that engaging STEM program at your school. What are those initial steps that you need to take? How can NextWaveSTEM be a help in that? What are those missing pieces of information? So with that being covered, we will jump right into it. So as a part of talking about the why, it's important to talk about what's happening in STEM. We hear that acronym a lot. Some of us really have our fingers on the dial. Some of us are trying to catch up, and we may be at the beginning of the STEM journey with our students. We may have done really traditional education, and we may be focused on more traditional assessment patterns and just meeting those goals from our various state agencies. But we want to get a better understanding of what's happening in the STEM, and maybe even the concept of what's happening with STEM in a more general sense. So I'm a big fan of understanding where we have started, where we began, to understanding where we are now. When we think about what's happening with STEM, why we're doing STEM, we have these ideas that are central to our children's education going into the future. The first is this idea that we are teaching subject matter that's actually relevant to our students' lives. Especially at the secondary level, we're seeing this really huge disconnect between what our students are learning through core competencies, what they end up using in the workplace, and even what they use in their everyday lives as functional adults. Those goals, those actual bases of knowledge and practice and application very seldom line up 100%. We want to make our time in the classroom with our students as relevant and as productive and as useful to our students as possible. What we've also seen when we think about the STEM space is this idea that we are distributing resources, whether that's equipment or teaching time, pedagogy, professional development. We're distributing our resources in such a way that are creating disparities amongst our student populations that we see replicated through our workforce at large. Some of these things are really, really, really well known. If we think about the gender bias and discrepancy in most STEM fields, if not all STEM fields, and it didn't used to always be this way. We've heard of those high-profile stories of how computer scientists and mathematicians, some of the earliest hard math learners, those quote-unquote computers, were actually women. We hear those stories of how manufacturers in the early days of Silicon Valley who were building and actually refining microprocessors and yes, even microchips were mostly women. These things do not have to continue on this trend if we can understand how to change the way we allocate our resources. But then we're also running into the situation where because of our paradigms around assessment, we actually have limited opportunities for effective assessment. Many of us are going professionally into this paradigm that says that we're hamstrung by our legislators and by our partner communities to figure out and really reflect, are my students learning? Are they getting the skills they need to succeed in a professional career? Are they getting the skills they need to be able to go on to tertiary education, to go on to the trade school or to the 2-year community college or the 4-year traditional university and not just uh, survive, but to actually thrive. And when we think about STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, our actual modalities for assessing are limited. We don't know whether or not the actual courses that we're teaching, in most cases, we don't know whether or not these are really translating really well until those positive outcomes at the next level. So it's important then to think about, okay, since we have these deficits, we have to then, before we actually address those deficits, recognize where we are in the history of the world, just where we are, period, and where we want to get our students to. And the place we want to get our students to is to be operating in what's called the fourth industrial revolution. Those of us who did really, really well in our history class have heard of the Industrial Revolution, but may not understand this popular conception that there are actually four industrial revolutions, and we're in the fourth one at this particular time. So when we think about what we've been teaching traditionally in our science and math classes, we are still, for the most part, teaching at an Industrial Revolution 2.0 scale. We're teaching our students skill sets that would make them ready to be able to go out and mass produce things. If they needed to work in the local factory, they're able to take those skills in algebra, take those skills and even trigonometry, take those skills that they may be learning in chemistry, that they would be learning in physics, right out of high school, and those skills translate really, really well for that. And they're getting the skills that they need to go in and remediate that material at the university level, or excel, really jump in and thrive and be prepared at the university, tertiary, master's degree, PhD degree level. That's all fine, great, and it's good. But what we need to understand is that starting in 1969, we saw this really, really intense shift and change in the ways in which we interact with technology in the workplace. We went from this ability to do great, great, great things with human power and understanding of natural sciences that are more basic to growing into a connected, globalized workforce. And not just a connected workforce when you think about logistics, but a connected workforce when you think about actually producing the engine of our economy that in many ways, our economy has become globalized. So what we keep hearing about is this revolution, this upcoming work revolution. And this revolution is here now because not only are we seeing these processes automated in logistics and production, but we're also now seeing the processes automated in our thinking and creation. That's where we're at now, where our workflows live in the cloud, where you have technologies like Zoom that can actually listen to my voice and optimize so that I sound good for you on the other end. How are students going to be prepared going through our courses that deal with subject matter that's that relevant to them? Just how they sound in a Zoom call and how that might reflect on their ability to interview for a job. How can we optimize and get them prepared to enter into that situation? Well, STEM. STEM is a shorthand answer. It's the reason why we're here. If you get beyond the acronyms, you have to understand that the whole purpose, whether it's including arts or if you're talking iSTEM or if you're talking METS, if you're engaged with CTE, if you're engaged with vocational training, architecture, whatever your context is around technical skills involving math, science, and technology, you're really talking about two things that are critical. That is the subject matter, what your students are actually learning, and your ability to integrate across disciplines. If students can take multiple disciplines that they're learning and apply them to solving singular problems or even problems amongst teams, then STEM is going to become an effective way for your students to actually be relevant in the workforce and be much, much better prepared for that next level of education. So it's helpful for us to then compare what we traditionally do, which is siloed, versus what we do or want to do, aspire to do now with our STEM education. traditionally, and the reason why we have this first or second industrial revolution picture of this cotton mill here is that the old ways in which we would teach these subject matters are really designed still for this industrialized way of actually producing students who will then enter the workforce. Um, in our sciences, our mathematics, and our technologies courses, the curricula is usually disconnected from each other. They don't have necessarily a whole lot, if anything, to do with one another. And we see those skill sets being developed in a vacuum. Science classes teach the natural science, chemistry, physics. Math courses teach computation and upper level algebra, and or actually basic algebra, upper level algebra, and some more practical maths like statistics or even home economics are rarely taught, if not entirely ignored. And the same is true when we think about like technology and engineering courses. They're either regulated to like really cream of the crop elective courses, or they're ignored altogether in our context, whether that's middle school or high school. But then we want to think about teaching STEM this new way. Standards alignments that allow for cross-cutting concepts to bring cohesion across our STEM courses. Assessment design that grows from the ability to retain skills and solve problems. We have to change the way in which we assess our students dramatically. And then a focus on hands-on technology. One of the most important things, and this is something we'll get into a little bit later on, is our students' ability to feel like they actually belong in these places, to build a STEM identity. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to get students hands-on with their technology right up front. The analogy that I make very often is that it's like playing an instrument. It's very, very difficult to play an instrument if the only way you will ever learn how to play it is virtually. It's very, very difficult to learn how to play an instrument if you get your hands on and you're scared to fail with that instrument. If you're scared to be a little bit rough with that instrument, if you're scared to learn how to handle the instrument properly, if you're scared to make mistakes. We want to give and empower our students with the opportunities to get hands-on, to have successes and failures, and to know that that's part of the growth process. And as they do that, they'll actually be getting worldwide input, once again, because of the interconnectedness of our information age, but also create products that have international proliferation and relevance. What do I mean by that? Students that are making work that we'll see students literally on the other side of the planet using, and become a foundation for curricula that we can continue to teach. So that's where we are. That's kind of the idea of where we want to get to. And now we want to talk about how we get there. How can we do some effective blueprinting from where we currently are, more traditional education, towards effective STEM learning. And the first thing we want to do is really establish 3 overarching goals. If we take our next steps with these 3 goals in mind, we are going to be better than good. We're going to be great at building effective STEM programs. The first is that we want to build strong foundations for STEM literacy. What do I mean by STEM literacy? STEM literacy really deals with the subject matter. How well are my students learning the science? How well are they learning about and creating and building technologies? How well are they solving both human-made and naturally occurring problems through the application of science and technology? How well are they not only learning the foundational math, but also learning how to apply them in a real world, that math becomes real? How well are they able to build in that skill set and growth? In some places, even when we think about for math, assessment, our traditional assessment kind of stands up. Problem solving and technology creation, we struggle with that foundationally, but that's a place for us to grow. So if we're building a STEM program and we want to have a great place to begin, we think about that first goal of literacy. How do we assess it? How do we build it? How can we support the building of that literacy first? The second is that we want to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM. Once we have this idea of how to assess and how to build and how to support, we want to understand who is getting access to that? It's amazing for me to have a great STEM curricula, have amazing teachers, have all the resources that I need, but we're still going to see persistent problems for a huge amount of our population here in the United States if that really great education is only available to a select number of students. Um, we are able to see problems solved amongst our student populations communities. We're able to see an expanded talent pool of students bringing diverse ideas and solutions to bear to some of society's most egregious and ongoing problems. And the only way we're able to see that and really take advantage of all that potential is to increase our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And the third, of course, I mentioned a little bit before, is that we want to draw direct one-to-one correlations between what we do in our classroom into workforce for the future. What does that look like? For a lot of us that understand career and technical education, it's about certification. It's about pulling in industry partners, forming those formalized paths to allow our students to go from high school to the workforce, or it may be stopgap. It may be doing those things that allow our students to grow even in their digital citizenship skills so that they're more prepared and more marketable in their next level of education. Those three ideas: literacy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and preparedness for the workforce. Those are our goals. Once again, it really comes down to that idea that our students are connected from the subject matter to the workforce outcome. The STEM literacy there is a subject matter. We want to get it to as much of our student population as we can through diversity and inclusion. And then we want to place them as much as we can into the pathways and pipelines for workforce outcome, whether that's the tertiary level or the direct technical route. Now, I would be doing a disservice for everyone on this line with us today if I didn't mention that we are in a time where we have to make special consideration with respect to our goals, and that is COVID-19. I know that if we hear the word unprecedented one more time this year, many of us will actually not be okay. And we're not okay just as a country. We're struggling. Many teachers, many students, lack of access, lack of resources. But this is a challenge that we all have to meet together. And when we think about these considerations in building our programming, we have to also prioritize the safety and wellness of our staff, for our students, while really focusing on the ability to create these high quality learning experiences. And that means also being flexible. So as we're building our program, the ability to adjust and find the flexibility to deliver our programming in different ways also becomes paramount. And these ideas may seem at odds, especially if you think about hands-on learning being really, really important for our students. But we'll find out a little bit later on that they can coexist, they can live together. So what is that going to look like when we think foundationally of curricula, instruction, delivery? It really depends on your situation. We may be in an area in the country where we're not quite ready to return. We've been completely hybrid remote learning, except for particular populations. That means that when our schools districts are ready to reopen, we're planning to have curricula and instruction that can pivot from what we've been learning remotely to hands-on learning in person, vice versa. If we find the surge of infections moment, many of us are living in states where we're seeing those weekly numbers of infections and unfortunately deaths increase week over week, and that might mitigate a public response that sends us back to remote learning if we are in person right now. We have to be ready for that. We have to have a curricula that can adjust to that. And we are in a place, just chronologically, where many of us have dealt with that shock once, back from when we had that spring turnover. So we're more prepared now to move through this in a much more organized and detailed way. And then, of course, there's that hybrid instructional moment. Having curricula that can, in an instructional model really, that can shift in between with our various populations that are both coming to and going from school. These things have to be front of our mind if we want to think about efficacy in STEM education. So the first goal we have to keep in mind, STEM literacy, problem solving through applicable skill. How do you learn the material? How does that material relate to the world? How can you apply that material to do something with it? That's what we want to build in our students first and foremost. And it's important to think about where we stand with respect to the rest of the world. If we think about just science literacy scores in the United States, the PISA, many of us may be a little bit familiar with respect to PISA testing, both science literacy and math literacy. In 2008, we were 19th out of 54th. We have to grow in our science literacy. We don't do much better in math, and analogous studies with respect to technology, we do slightly better because of our access to technology, but we're still not where we want to be. We want to be leaders. We want to be taking advantage of the diverse populations and actual resources that we have here in the United States. And the reason we want to do that, once again, just goes back to workforce development. So literacy, we know, has to increase, not just from our basic accessibility or accessibility perspective, but also from the perspective of real world outcomes. How do we build that literacy? At NextWaveSTEM, we believe that it is critical, vital, that we use the standards as a guide to be able to do that. Both Common Core state standards, but also the next generation science standards. And I focus on and highlight the next generation science standards because of what they aim to accomplish, especially through the application of hands-on technology. Common Core ELA and math standards for states are super duper important because of the cross-cutting principles that we see coming through to the NGSS, but the NGSS allows us to do direct application of those skills to actually doing work and solving problems. It takes things away from the abstract and brings it into this real world application of how does this thing affect the physical world around me? So that means that when the National Research Council built these standards, they gave us this idea of core ideas, the engineering principles, and those cost-cutting standards that I mentioned before, especially when we think about the Common Core state standards. What do they cover? What is the important thing that's happening there? What are happening in our disciplinary, core disciplinary areas, those implementations? Physical sciences, earth and space science, life science, engineering, technology, and the application of science. If you're in a situation where you may not know exactly what needs to be taught from a raw subject matter perspective, the NGSS is our friend at multiple grade levels. So it doesn't matter if it's middle school or high school, the NGSS gets us to a place in our curricula and instruction where our students are encountering material that talks about the real world and covers those important subject matters in the real world that they can use to solve problems. And there's been this idea of this advance in cost-cutting development as well. So when we think about these accessible questions, what our students will learn how to do. If we're thinking about the DCIs, those disciplinary core implementations, we have those basic ideas in learning sciences. For example, if I were at the middle school level, I'm going to be asking the student, what happens if you push or pull an object harder? Or if I'm at the middle school level thinking about life sciences, what happens to an organism when their environment changes? We have questions about science in the world around us that allow us to develop drone applications in that K-2 question, where that will allow us to evaluate the effects of global warming on our environment, if we're thinking about the middle school and high school level. And when we get into these new strata for cross-cutting development, we get really excited because there are these ideas of engineering design as well. We're not going to get super duper deep into that definition of engineering. Suffice it to say that an engineer, and I am a professional engineer by formalized training, is that we want to solve a problem using science, mathematics, and technology. And when we solve that problem, we are creating one of two things: either a new physical product or a new process. Our students, when they engage in questions like what are the characteristics and properties of waves and how can they be used, we're asking them and building within them this foundational knowledge that may go into actual electromagnetic waves and solve some problems with how slow our Wi-Fi is in our school. Or if we ask them a question about how and why do organisms interact with their environment and what are the effects of these interactions, we may be gauging ways in which they will end up doing epidemiology and virology, preparing for the next pandemic and preventing that pandemic before it happens. Once again, these questions are structured in such a way where we are going to be building those real world connections to the field and to industries. And it's super duper important to focus on the STEM. But if I were to say that there's one part in that acronym that's more important than any, it's the idea of engineering design. And the reason why that's so important is that engineering in its definition is about problem solving. And problem solving in taxonomically appropriate ways for higher orders of thinking. We want to shift the paradigm for our students from this is how it's done to how can you do it? And the great thing about the question of how can you do it is that that question becomes open-ended. So it lends itself well to project-based learning for our students. And that becomes a really engaging and rewarding experience from our educators. So two examples that I always focus on for brevity's sake, really more than anything, are drone technology and 3D printing. These are two technologies that we also spend a particular focus on at NextWaveSTEM, where we've developed curricula in drone technology, robotics, 3D printing, and artificial intelligence. But I focus on 3D printing and drones because of their accessibility with respect to high school and middle school students, but also because these are technologies that are surprisingly accessible even from the hands-on home perspective as well. So we're engaging those ideas in computer design principles and mathematics and engineering. We're seeing these actual performance tasks where students are going to be programming and flying drones. They're going to be printing, doing remote processing. But more than anything, these technologies and these examples become important because they become a foundation with which students are going to simulate solving problems and solve real problems. And when we think about the standards that we see applied to drones, we're actually making these direct connections between what we can do to solve problems in the real world. So we have this actual standard, natural earth science standard at the 3 through 5 level, that lower middle school level, where we're having our students conduct investigations on balanced and unbalanced forces. The drone technology that students integrate with become a perfect way to do that. If we take that step up taxonomically to the middle school level, where we are seeing different design solutions being analyzed and compared and even combined to solve problems, students will work together as they integrate computer science to control that drone and fly that drone. And then when we get to the high school level, where we're engaging with our life sciences a little bit more, where we are creating or revising simulations to think about the impacts of human activity on biodiversity, our drone could actually stand in as a simulation device, specifically thinking about pollinators. We have the ability to really empower our students from a bunch of different modalities and build that STEM literacy with a hands-on technology. Really, really super critical as we're evaluating and considering which curricula to use. The same idea is with the 3D printing. really focused on engineering design, but more so, we are thinking about this way to solve problems based on criteria. How good a job do our students do at reading that product brief and designing out to create an object that fits very specific criteria for that brief? How can we iteratively test? How can we actually close the engineering design loop like many product designers do? And then how can we do, once again, this design that takes into account our constraints, knowing that time is not unlimited, knowing that there's not an unlimited amount of resources, knowing that we have outside forces that we can control for, like safety, and even aesthetics. If we want to bring in the A and think of a STEAM application, what can we do to make a thing that satisfies these ideas? We can see that we're really branching in and pulling in from a lot of diverse areas of learning that our students have to implement with 3D printing. So STEM literacy. STEM literacy should really spark the excitement from our students because it grows from a place of actual hands-on experience. As much as humanly possible, we want to give our students things that they can see in action, that they can have interaction with, and that we can draw a direct connection to solving real-world problems in industry, in our standards, and in our assessments. Let's keep it real is the best way that I can sum up this idea of building in literacy. So the second thing we want to talk about is ways to increase diversity and inclusion. And a great way to really think about that is actual cultural responsiveness. When you think of not only curricular design, but actually instruction. This has been a hot topic as we think about the response just societally at large to places where we haven't seen representation, diversity, or inclusion in a lot of the decision-making processes that impact not only our students, but will impact them as they become full-fledged adults working in the workforce. We want to also teach responsibly, because at the end of the day, it increases our students' agency. That's set aside, something that we don't include in slides, but that becomes really important. When we think about culturally responsive teaching, what we're saying is that pedagogy recognizes and values cultural references from different perspectives. And that instruction builds on our students' prior knowledge, things that students know that we might not know, and things that students know that we might not know that they know. Our students have the ability to surprise us. If you've spent any amount of time in the classroom, you know that your students are going to tell you something about what you're teaching that you didn't know previously before. And if they can't tell you anything new about what you're teaching, then it might be time to evaluate what you're teaching. We have to bring their lived experience into the classroom and consider that perspective as we plan our curricula and think about how what we're teaching becomes relevant in their actual context and perspective. And this is on a bunch of different modalities. Country of origin, if we're thinking about immigrant populations of students, their actual socioeconomic status and their social location, which really encapsulates these other ideas, whether they're in an urban, suburban, or even a rural context, their race, their ethnicity, what languages they speak, whether that's spoken language or sign language, if they're differently abled, their actual physical ability, learning differences and cognitive differences, generational location, all these things we want to bring to bear as we're deciding on a curricula and instructional pedagogy. So at NextWaveSTEM, what we think about is really integrating something that we have learned from our longest standing partner, Chicago Public Schools, which is called the equity curve. And what it says is that from a teaching real world pedagogical standpoint, we have to do 5 things, and we have to do them constantly, we have to do them critically, and we have to do them well. And the first is that we have to remain curious. If we think that if we think that our students can't teach us anything new as administrators, as educators, we actually lose the ability to understand who they actually are, and we can't teach to them as effectively as we want to. The second is that we have to be urgent. Um, it is tiring. It can be exhausting to find the time, to find the space, to find the resources, but we have to make sure that this doesn't become a goal that we push into the future when we have more time, or when we think we have more resources, or when we think we have more energy. We have to do it now. The third is acknowledging that the work is difficult and requires resiliency, not just for our students, but for us as teachers. There has to be space for grace. There has to be space for us to make mistakes. I know that we're being evaluated as educators. There are standards that we have to hit, but we have to advocate for the ability, not just to say, okay, let's hit the standards, let's hit the benchmarks, let's hit the goals, but let's also think about where our growth is. That has to be built into our assessment of our quality. The fourth is that there's got to be some vulnerability on the parts specifically of our students, but also of our educators, that we're able to collectively problem solve. And when we think about the collective, we're not just talking student, teacher, administrator, student, staff. We're thinking about a whole community effort. When, not if, when our relevance and our curricula fall short of what's relevant for our community, how responsive, how open are we to hearing from that community? Will we be able to adjust? Will we be and organizationally defensive? Will that be our posture? Can we instead take a framework that says we're partnering not only with our students and with our parents, but with our whole community, with our whole district, with our whole city, with industry, to teach something and make better students for the workplace? And then, of course, all of this that we've talked about is about empathy, just basic human decency and kindness. Structures, school districts, they're organizations, but organizations are made of people. The decisions that we make organizationally are reflections of the decisions that we make personally. And the most important thing that we can do is share those experiences and find commonalities towards our goal amongst our entire communities. That's about being empathetic, knowing where your populations and your communities are hurting and finding ways to bridge the gap. All of these things really tie into effective culturally responsive teaching. If you do effective culturally responsive teaching, if you can be empathetic with students who are struggling with their place in STEM, if you can be empathetic and vulnerable and be resilient as you're trying to increase your diversity in your teaching population, where you're trying to increase your participation in girls, when you're trying to increase your efficacy towards teaching your special education students, I promise you, you will find positive results. And then finally, we talk about this idea of our third solution, STEM learning through real world application, the actual connection to the workforce. How can we make sure that what we do ties in directly to the jobs of the future and jobs of today the students might have? When we think about curricula, but more importantly, when we think about what is happening amongst communities, amongst our society, and what our students need, it's important that they're able to answer some basic questions and know pathways to get to know more. If students ask you what a drone is, it's one thing to be able to pull up an Oxford English definition for what a drone is. It's quite another to develop a culture around our district of what a drone does and why it's relevant. And not only to understand that it ranges in equipment and size and ability, but to have one flying around your school and have access to students in such a way that is expected that at some point they will work with this technology. It should be creating this idea that this isn't special, that this isn't the dessert that sits off to the side of the main dinner that you'll be eating, but that students here will leave their time with you saying, yeah, this is a thing that I did. This is a thing that was expected of us as students at the school, because they understood that these were real world opportunities for us to grow and learn. So when you think about the way that these drones are being used today, it's not just vaporware. Of course, we know that drones are used as military tools, but in the agricultural sector, in actual infrastructure, whether that is in journalism or in actual city planning, when we monitor traffic, many of us have heard about drones doing parcel delivery. Amazon's been doing that work, and there's some other really exciting startups that are doing that work too, but also expanding it out into meteorology and astronomy, and even firefighting, public safety applications. We want to make sure that our students are able to do things like the FAA Part 104 certification, so they can operate drones remotely, and then know more about drones and take those pathways towards drone industry. If we stay with that second example, once again, of 3D printing, we may have heard of a 3D printer. We have this idea that a 3D printer makes a physical object, but you want to make this direct connection, especially with 3D printing, to manufacturing, that we have this old paradigm for manufacturing, and now we have a new paradigm for manufacturing that becomes really important for us to embrace. But why is it important for us to embrace? Because of what the numbers are telling us about what's happening in the industry. If you are in the manufacturing industry, 3D printing is going to be used the majority of the time in the prototyping of a product. Doesn't matter if it's your toothbrush, your light bulb, the glass that's on your table that you drink water out of, your computer, your car. More times than not, when we're developing this object, a 3D printer is involved in that process. And then after the 3D printer is involved in the process, we see that 43% of the time, 2 out of 5 times, some part of that object is actually being made with a 3D printer. So it's incredible to imagine that 40% of the things that are in our homes, in our schools, in our places of business, in our places of worship, all these things around us have been produced at some point during this process, actually integrating 3D printing technology. We hear all the time that 3D printing is going to change the future of manufacturing, but we don't even quite oftentimes know the ways in which 3D printing is changing our present. That 3D printing is such an important, such a critical part of the way in which we make things both here and abroad. Something that we want to encourage our students to learn and to be certified in, whether that's through MakerBot or through NextWaveSTEM, that's important for them to grow into. We want to create those correct pathways. And we've got this little example here. It seems like it's something that's really, really out of our reach in terms of the equipment, but the thing is, 3D printing as a 3-step process, design, slicing, and printing, is accessible for your students for them to be able to do remotely as well. So with that being said, we want to make sure that the technologies that we select, the pathways that we choose for our students, are things in this COVID time perspective that they can adjust and deliver remotely and receive remotely and actually grow and practice. So fire hose and information there, those 3 steps are really about building the STEM literacy, increasing the diversity and inclusion, and then on top of that, making those direct workforce application connections for our students. Those are the great foundations for building that STEM programming. How can we help you? What does NextWaveSTEM do to further your district's goals towards that end? Well, something that you're doing right now is actually our free PDs for educators and for administrators. We've been doing this since March. We're going to continue into the foreseeable future. And this is just a way for you to get sneak peeks, tidbits. We're always taking feedback from our educator communities. We've worked with over 200 schools and tens of thousands of students, and those educators are telling us all the time, what are the ways, even as education is shifting rapidly with respect to instructional pedagogy because of online learning, what are the ways in which we can support? Those PDs are always ongoing. But some of the meatier things that we do at NextWaveSTEM are actually in the form of our curricula. We deliver those curricula both in person and here in the Chicagoland area, but all over the country with respect to the online learning with our certified instructors. And something that we're really excited about is growing our ability to serve you in our curricula through licensing. Courses K through 12 and drones, robotics, 3D printing, and artificial intelligence. And it's not just a one and done. It's the equipment, it's the training on the technology, on the specific courses. It's actually forming a partnership with NextWaveSTEM that allows us to consult and grow your program, build out your makerspace, make sure that your students are on the correct pathway to building literacy and to making those workforce connections. Those become really critical to what we do in NextWaveSTEM. It's what we're passionate about, it's what we do really well, and it's what we would love to partner with your schools and your districts to be able to do in the future. So, fire hose of information, kind of sprinted there at the end, but I'm sure that you were scribbling down those notes furiously as we went. I want to open the floor up for our participants. The chat is open. The Q&A functionality on Zoom is open. Do you have any questions that I can kind of jump into the weeds on for you right now? And I'll just pause for a moment just to let those well, not microphones, but just to let those keyboards warm up a little bit for your questions. No questions so far, but I just will hold the line open just for a little bit for anyone who might have any questions. Just a few more moments. Oh, Melanie, thank you so much for that. Looking forward to sharing this presentation with you. And if you are looking for any of the other presentations we've done, we don't have them as PDFs to share, but what we can do for you is direct you to our NextWaveSTEM email, not email, but our NextWaveSTEM YouTube page, where you can find those presentations as well. Check us out on YouTube, just type in NextWaveSTEM, will be the first thing that pops up. Well, like I said before, I know that's a whole lot of information, and you might have some things to adjust and think about and might come to mind a little bit later on. If you do have those questions, my email address is really, really easy. Desmond@nextwavestem.com. We're on all social media as well. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. No TikTok. That's something that we'll have to get an intern to jump into at some point. I neither take nor do I talk, but I would love to get to that platform. Connect with us. We'll be connecting with you. And we love to just keep that conversation about generating really, really effective STEM at a district-wide level. But until then, until we get those communiques and have a chance to interact with you all, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. Reach out to us if you have any questions. Be on the lookout also for an email with the proof of your attendance today, and also with a link to the recording for today's webinar, as well as a hard copy of today's webinar. If you have any questions, let me know. Until then, be safe, be well, and we will speak to you on the next webinar. Bye-bye, everyone.